The ambassador's ship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star. Talvin had visited 47 worlds in his 3 centuries of service to the Galactic Union. But something about this blue planet made his skin prickle with unease. The reading showed a civilization barely past its industrial age. Yet their orbital space was cluttered with weapons platforms that his sensors classified as concerningly aggressive. His mission was simple. The Ravager swarm had consumed 17 worlds in 2 cycles. The Union's forces, trained in honor combat and ceremonial warfare for 3,000 years of peace, were being slaughtered. They needed soldiers, fresh troops, bodies to hold the line while the Council figured out a real solution. Humans seemed perfect, primitive enough to follow orders, advanced enough to use Union weapons, desperate enough to accept any offer of galactic membership. The meeting took place in a fortress buried deep inside a mountain. General Park Hyun sat across from Talvin, his face carved from stone and silence. Around the table sat representatives from every human nation, their eyes sharp and calculating in ways that made the ambassador uncomfortable. "We offer your species provisional membership in the Galactic Union," Talvin said, his translator device rendering his words in perfect human languages. "In exchange, we ask for military support. 10,000 soldiers for a 5-year deployment. You will be trained, equipped, and compensated. Your world will gain access to technologies that will advance your civilization by centuries." General Park leaned back in his chair. "You're losing a war, it wasn't a question." Talvin's double heart skipped. "We face an unprecedented threat. The Ravager swarm knows no honor, no mercy. Our military doctrines were not designed for such an enemy." "Show us," Park said. The holographic display filled the room with images of the Ravagers, insectoid nightmares the size of ground vehicles moving in swarms of millions. Footage showed Union soldiers in formation, firing their weapons with precise discipline and being overrun in minutes. The Ravagers didn't retreat, didn't negotiate. They consumed everything organic and moved to the next world. One of the human representatives, a woman from the Northern Territories, spoke up. "Your soldiers fight like they're in a parade. Neat lines, organized retreats. You're fighting a plague with ceremony." Talvin felt his translator struggle with her tone. "Was it contempt, pity? We can offer training in Union military protocols," he said stiffly. General Park smiled and Talvin's unease deepened. There was something predatory in that expression. "Ambassador, we'll provide your soldiers, but not the ones you're expecting." 3 days later, Talvin stood in a facility that humans called a supermax prison. Through reinforced glass, he watched as 500 humans were processed for deployment. Their files made his blood run cold. Kang Minho, former Special Operations, convicted of 27 counts of murder during unauthorized missions. Psychological profile: high intelligence, complete absence of empathy, enjoys violence. Yoon Ji-won, former intelligence operative, toppled 3 governments using nothing but manipulation and selective assassinations, smiled throughout her trial. Still smiling now, Lee Do-yeon, military strategist, orchestrated a chemical attack that killed 30,000 civilians to end a regional conflict faster. Showed no remorse. Claimed it saved lives in the long run. "These are criminals," Talvin said, his voice shaking. "Murderers, psychopaths, you're sending us your worst people." General Park stood beside him, watching the prisoners file into the transport bay. "You asked for soldiers who could face your nightmare. We're giving you ours. These individuals are dangerous, unstable, they'll break under pressure." "No," Park said quietly. "They'll break your enemy. These people have spent their lives hurting other humans. Humans who can think, plan, and fight back. Your Ravagers are just animals by comparison. Mindless, simple. For people like Kang Minho, this will be easy." Talvin watched as a woman with dead eyes walked past, hands shackled. She glanced at him and winked. He jerked back involuntarily. "We offered them a choice," Park continued. "Die in prison or fight in space. Every single one volunteered. They have nothing to lose and everything to prove. You wanted soldiers who wouldn't break when facing extinction? These people have already faced their own extinction. They've been caged like animals for years. Now you're giving them permission to be what they are." "What are they?" Talvin whispered. "Monsters," Park said. "The kind that even humans fear." The transport ship left Earth's orbit with 500 inmates aboard. Talvin transmitted his report to the Celestial Council, recommending immediate rejection of the human forces. They were too dangerous, too unpredictable, This wasn't what the Union needed. The Council overruled him. They were desperate. The Ravagers had just taken another world. 6 billion dead in a week. They needed bodies on the front lines. They needed time. If these humans could buy them even a few months, it was worth the risk. Aboard the transport ship, Kang Minho stood at the viewport, watching Earth shrink behind them. Around him, 499 other inmates adjusted to their new reality. Some were excited. Some were scared. Most were calculating. A younger man approached him nervously. Kim Tae-young, his file said. Multiple murder convictions. Gang warfare. Is it true what they said? That we're fighting aliens? Minho nodded slowly. Bugs, millions of them. They eat everything and everyone. And we're supposed to stop them? No, Minho said, his voice flat and certain. We're supposed to kill them all. Every single one. Because that's what we're good at. Yoon Ji-won joined them at the viewport. Do you think they understand what they've done? The aliens? What do you mean? Tae-young asked. She smiled that same cold smile from her trial. They invited predators to fight their war. They opened their borders to the most dangerous humans alive and gave us weapons. They're scared of their enemy, but they should be more scared of us. Minho watched the stars ahead. For the first time in 8 years since they'd locked him in a cell and thrown away the key, he felt something close to purpose. The galaxy was at war. The civilized species were losing because they'd forgotten how to be savage, but humans never forgot. They'd spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. Now they had a new target. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying Earth's worst nightmares toward a war that was about to change in ways the Galactic Union couldn't imagine. Behind them, General Park watched the stars and wondered if he'd just saved the galaxy or doomed it. The, human transport arrived at Forward Base Epsilon 6 weeks after leaving Earth. The base was a massive military installation orbiting a dead moon, home to 50,000 Union soldiers from a dozen species. It represented the last major defensive position between the Ravagers and 3 populated systems. Commander Velkarn of the Praetor Guard watched the humans disembark with growing horror. They didn't march in formation. They didn't salute. They walked off the transport like predators sizing up new territory, their eyes scanning everything with an intensity that made seasoned soldiers uncomfortable. Kang Minho was first down the ramp. He looked at the assembled Union forces, the neat rows of barracks, the organized command structure, and smiled slightly. It reminded him of every military base he'd infiltrated before his capture. Orderly, predictable, easy to break. Welcome to Forward Base Epsilon, Velkarn said through his translator. You will undergo 6 weeks of integration training before deployment to combat zones. We will teach you Union military protocols, weapon systems, and squad tactics. Minho walked past him without acknowledgement. The other humans followed. Soldier, Velkarn's voice cracked like a whip. You will show respect to superior officers. Minho stopped, turned slowly. We're not soldiers. We're weapons. Point us at the enemy or send us back to Earth. We didn't come here for school. The translator struggled with his tone. Several Praetor guards reached for their sidearms. Yoon Ji-won stepped forward smoothly. What my colleague means is that we're eager to engage the enemy. We've studied the tactical data during transit. We understand the threat. Perhaps we could participate in a training exercise to demonstrate our capabilities? Her voice was silken poison. Velkarn's translator conveyed the words but couldn't capture the manipulation underneath. He'd been in military service for 40 years. He recognized a dangerous intelligence when he saw it. Very well. Tomorrow at dawn we'll run combat simulations. The humans never made it to dawn training. 3 hours after midnight, every alarm in Forward Base Epsilon screamed to life. The Ravagers had arrived 3 days early, a swarm of 200,000 coming in fast from the dark side of the moon. Standard protocol called for organized retreat, fall back to secondary positions, preserve forces, wait for reinforcements. Velkarn was issuing evacuation orders when the humans broke containment. Kang Minho didn't ask permission. He armed himself from the base armory, taking weapons that Union soldiers considered too dangerous for standard use. Plasma charges, molecular destabilizers, void grenades that violated 3 separate weapons treaties. Behind him, 499 other humans geared up with terrifying efficiency. What are you doing? Velkarn demanded. Fall back to evacuation transports. We're going hunting, Minho said simply and walked out the main airlock directly toward the approaching swarm. The base's external cameras caught everything. 500 humans charged into 200,000 Ravagers without hesitation, without formation, without any tactical coordination that Union military databases recognized. They scattered like fragments from an explosion, each group using the base's external structures, the moon's terrain, and the Ravagers' own bodies as weapons and shields. Yoon Ji-won led a team into the base's maintenance tunnels, sealing doors behind her. The Ravagers, following heat signatures and movement, poured in after them. 3 minutes later, the entire tunnel network exploded. She'd turned the base's power conduits into a massive electrical trap, using the Ravagers' conductive exoskeletons to chain reaction through thousands of them. She emerged from a secondary access port, covered in burns and alien blood, still smiling. Lee Do-yeon didn't fight the swarm head-on. He identified the Ravagers' command structure in the first 30 seconds, marked the larger specimens coordinating the attack, and organized targeted assassinations. Within 20 minutes, the swarm's coordination collapsed into chaos. Kang Min-ho fought like violence made flesh. He didn't aim for kill shots. He aimed for maximum damage with minimum ammunition, leg joints to cripple, sensory organs to blind. His squad didn't hold positions. They created kill zones and lured the Ravagers into them, then moved before the swarm could adapt. The Union soldiers, ordered to evacuate, instead found themselves watching through monitors in stunned silence. This wasn't military combat. This was something primal and terrifying. The humans fought with creativity that bordered on artistic, turning every piece of debris, every environmental factor, every biological detail of the Ravagers into a weapon. When the sun rose over the dead moon 6 hours later, the Ravager swarm was gone. 3,000 confirmed kills. The rest had retreated, something Union intelligence had never recorded before. Human casualties, 12 dead, 38 injured. Kang Min-ho walked back into the base as Velkarn stared in shock. The human was covered head to toe in the black ichor that served as Ravager blood. Part of his left ear was gone. He was limping, and he was laughing. That was a light probe, Min-ho said. When does the real fighting start? Velkarn had no answer. He'd commanded troops for 4 decades, fought in 17 different conflicts during the Union's early expansion period. He'd seen brave soldiers and cowardly ones, brilliant tacticians and foolish ones. He'd never seen anything like this. Yoon Ji-won approached, equally blood-soaked. Your protocols assume the enemy thinks like you do. Honor, rules, organized retreat. The Ravagers don't think that way, so we don't either. You violated every military doctrine, Velkarn said weakly. We won, she replied. Isn't that the point? The footage from Forward Base Epsilon spread through Union military networks within hours. Some commanders saw hope. Most saw horror. These humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like the very thing the Union was fighting against. Something that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be predicted, couldn't be stopped. Ambassador Talavine watched the footage and sent another desperate message to Earth. General Park's response was brief. They're just getting started. 6 months after the defense of Forward Base Epsilon, the human presence in the war had grown to 5,000. They'd been deployed to the worst combat zones, the places where Union forces had the highest casualty rates and lowest morale. In every location, the pattern repeated. Humans arrived, ignored protocols, fought with savage efficiency, and won. The Ravagers had taken 3 more worlds, but their advance had slowed to a crawl. For the first time in 2 years, the Union wasn't just losing slower. They were holding ground, but the cost was becoming clear. Commander Lee Do-hyun stood in the strategic planning center of the Union flagship Eternal Resolve, surrounded by holographic displays showing the entire warfront. He'd spent 3 months analyzing Ravager behavior, studying their expansion patterns, and he'd reached a conclusion that made even his fellow humans uncomfortable. They're not just invading, he said to the assembled Union commanders. They're reproducing. Every world they take becomes a breeding ground. 6 months from larvae to warrior. To the math. Admiral Sektar of the Celestial Fleet studied the data with growing horror. You're suggesting their numbers are growing faster than we can kill them. I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you. You're fighting a losing war because you're only targeting their military forces. You need to attack their breeding worlds. The room fell silent. Attacking civilian populations was forbidden under Union military law. The very concept violated 3,000 years of warfare tradition. We don't target non-combatants, Sektar said firmly. Lee Do-hyun's expression didn't change. The Ravagers don't have non-combatants. Every larvae will be a soldier in 6 months. Every breeding world is a military factory. You're losing this war because you're applying honor to an enemy that has none. We would become no better than them. You'll be alive, Do-hyun said coldly. They'll be extinct. That's the only math that matters. The Celestial Council reviewed his proposal and rejected it unanimously. They would not compromise their values even for survival. They would find another way. Kang Min-ho read the council's decision and called a meeting of the human commanders. 20 individuals gathered in a salvaged cargo bay on a captured asteroid station. These were the worst of Earth's worst. Murderers, terrorists, war criminals who'd found purpose in an alien war. The council rejected the breeding world strategy, Min-ho said without preamble. They're going to lose because they can't do what's necessary. Yoon Ji-won leaned against a bulkhead, cleaning her nails with a combat knife. So we do it anyway. That's mutiny, someone pointed out. That's survival, she replied. They brought us here to win a war. We're going to win it our way. They voted. 20 hands raised in agreement. Not because they cared about the Union, but because they'd finally found something worth doing with their miserable lives. 3 days later, 3 Union warships went dark. Their crews were sedated, secured, and safely locked in escape pods. The humans took control of the vessels and jumped to deep space, heading for Ravager territory. Their target was Theta 7, a world deep behind enemy lines. Intelligence reports showed it was a primary breeding colony. 2 billion larvae in various stages of development. The Union had considered it untouchable. Too far, too well defended, too much of a risk. The humans considered it a priority target. They approached Theta 7 using stealth technology that barely worked. The Ravager defenders numbered in the millions. A frontal assault would be suicide, so they didn't assault it frontally. Lee Do-hyun had spent 6 months studying Ravager biology. He knew their atmospheric requirements, their nutritional needs, their reproductive cycle. He designed a multi-stage attack that would make the world uninhabitable. First came the orbital bombardment, not of military targets, but of the planet's equatorial regions, where the breeding chambers were concentrated. The warships fired for 6 hours straight, turning fertile ground into burning wasteland. Then came the biological agents, viruses tailored to Ravager biology, released into the atmosphere, not instantly lethal, slowly debilitating, attacking their ability to process nutrients to maintain body temperature, to reproduce. Finally, the humans seeded the oceans with compounds that would contaminate the food chain. Nothing complex, just persistent toxins that would accumulate in tissue and be passed from generation to generation. Theta 7 didn't explode. It didn't burn. It just slowly died. 2 billion Ravager larvae perished over 72 hours. The adults fled, abandoning the world as it became a poisoned tomb. The Union was horrified. The Ravagers, for the first time in their species' history, knew fear. 3 adjacent star systems saw Ravager forces retreat without contact. They'd encountered an enemy willing to match their brutality, to exceed it even. Ambassador Talavine appeared before the Celestial Council, his voice shaking with rage and disgust. They've committed genocide. They've violated every law of warfare. They've become the very monsters we're fighting. General Park Hyun's response came from Earth, broadcast across Union networks. You asked for soldiers who could win an unwinnable war. We sent you people who understand that survival doesn't care about honor. These individuals were already condemned to death on Earth. They're expendable. They're weapons with nothing to lose. And yes, they're monsters. But they're your monsters now. They're winning your war using methods you're too civilized to stomach. So you have a choice. Accept what's necessary or lose everything trying to maintain your values. The council debated for 3 days while the Ravagers continued retreating. The moral arguments were compelling. The survival arguments were stronger. They didn't officially approve the human tactics. They simply stopped trying to stop them. Choi Nari, a bioweapons engineer who'd been serving multiple life sentences, watched the council's non-decision with grim satisfaction. She turned to her team of former researchers, all of them convicts, all of them given purpose in this war. They're learning, she said, slowly, but they're learning that nice civilizations don't survive contact with extinction. They need us to be the evil they can't be, so let's be thorough about it. Her team got to work designing the next generation of biological weapons, not to kill quickly but to make Ravager worlds economically unviable. To turn their strength, rapid reproduction and adaptation into a weakness. The war continued. The humans pushed deeper into Ravager space, burning worlds and breaking rules. Behind them, Union forces advanced into territory they'd written off as lost forever. The galaxy was being saved. The cost was measured in compromised values and civilian casualties that the Council tried not to count. And the humans, Earth's condemned criminals, finally understood what they'd become. Not soldiers, not saviors, just weapons pointed at an enemy, fired by a civilization too decent to pull the trigger themselves. 1 year into the war, everything had changed. The Ravagers were in retreat across 16 sectors. Human tactical doctrine, once considered barbaric, had been reluctantly integrated into Union military training. Words like acceptable losses and strategic sacrifice entered the vocabulary of species that hadn't used them in millennia. Captain Kim Tae-young stood on the bridge of a captured Ravager vessel, now refitted with Union technology and crewed by humans. She'd been a gang enforcer on Earth, sentenced to death for killing 32 people in territorial disputes. Now she commanded a ship and 200 soldiers in the liberation of occupied worlds. The target was Varan Prime, homeworld of the Varan people. 600 million civilians trapped under Ravager occupation. The Union had tried 3 times to liberate it and failed each time, losing thousands of soldiers and dozens of ships. The humans approached the problem differently. Tae-young studied the tactical displays. The Ravagers had fortified the major cities using Varan civilians as living shields. Union forces couldn't fire without massive collateral damage. Their honor demanded they find a way to save everyone. How many Varans can we evacuate if we create a diversion? She asked her tactical officer. Maybe 2 million. We'd need to draw the Ravagers away from the population centers. And the other 400 million? Silence on the bridge. Everyone knew what she was thinking. We use them as bait, Tae-young said quietly. We leak false intel that we're evacuating everyone from the southern continent. The Ravagers will concentrate forces there to stop us. Then we hit the real population centers in the north while they're out of position. Her second-in-command, a former terrorist named Park Ji-young, spoke carefully. The Ravagers will kill everyone on the southern continent when they realize it's a diversion. 200 million dead. Versus 600 million if we don't act, Tae-young countered. I'm not asking if it's right. I'm asking if it'll work. It worked. The humans leaked their evacuation plan through compromised channels. The Ravagers took the bait, moving 80% of their forces to the southern continent. When the evacuation ships arrived empty, the Ravagers slaughtered every Varan they could find in retaliation. But in the north, Union and human forces liberated 400 million civilians while the enemy was out of position. The mission was declared a success. 400 million saved, only 200 million lost. The Varan survivors rioted. They burned human flags, attacked human soldiers, demanded justice for the murdered. They called Captain Kim Tae-young a war criminal, a murderer no different from the Ravagers. She accepted the accusations without defense. What could she say? They were right. The incident sparked protests across liberated Union worlds. Pure Defense Coalition formed, a movement of Union soldiers who refused to fight alongside humans, who argued that survival wasn't worth becoming monsters. Ambassador Talveen led the diplomatic effort to have the humans removed from Union space. We've won the war, he argued before the Council. The Ravagers are retreating. We no longer need these weapons. Send them back to Earth before they corrupt us further. General Park Hyun responded with another broadcast, his final one before retirement. You think we've corrupted your soldiers? We showed them reality. War isn't ceremony. It isn't honor. It's mathematics. Kill more of them than they kill of you. Protect more of yours than you lose. Win. Your ancestors had 3,000 years of peace because the galaxy was empty of threats. You forgot what real war costs. My people never forgot. We've been killing each other since we learned to make weapons. We're very good at it. You can hate us. You should hate us. What we do is hateful. But first, let us finish the job. Let us end this war completely, so you can go back to pretending war can be civilized. The Pure Defense Coalition attempted to sabotage a human operation in the Kelvin system, believing they were preventing a war crime. Their interference resulted in a Union fleet being caught unprepared. When Ravagers counterattacked, 30,000 Union soldiers were about to be overrun when Yoon Ji-won's squadron arrived. 50 humans against 500,000 Ravagers. The math was impossible. Ji-won knew they couldn't win, but they could buy time for the Union fleet to escape. She ordered her ships to engage at close range, using tactics that the Union called suicidal and the humans called standard. Her final transmission was broadcast across Union military channels. This is Captain Yoon Ji-won to all Union forces. We're going to hold this position for 10 minutes. That's how long you have to run. Don't waste it. Don't mourn us. We were dead the moment Earth sent us here. At least this way we died for something. Her squadron lasted 12 minutes. 3 survivors. Yoon Ji-won wasn't one of them. The Union soldiers she saved included members of the Pure Defense Coalition. They'd watched humans sacrifice themselves to preserve Union values, even as those same humans violated every value the Union held sacred. The protests didn't stop, but they changed. The hatred remained, but it was mixed with guilt, confusion, and a terrible understanding. The humans weren't fighting because they were monsters. They were fighting like monsters because they'd accepted they were already damned. They'd made peace with being hateful so that others could remain decent. Kang Min-ho attended Yoon Ji-won's memorial service. 57 humans dead, honored by the species they'd been sent to save. He stood before the assembled crowd of Union dignitaries and soldiers, covered in scars from a year of continuous combat. Ji-won once told me that we were the punishment Earth sent to the galaxy, he said. The proof that humans are dangerous. But she was wrong. We're not punishment. We're vaccination. We're the small dose of evil that prevents a larger infection. You can survive this war now because we taught you that sometimes the only way to fight monsters is with worse monsters. Hate us. Remember us as the barbarians who saved you, but remember that you needed saving, and remember that we volunteered to be your monsters, knowing you'd never forgive us for it. 3 years into the war, with victory finally within reach, the humans understood their true role. They weren't soldiers. They weren't heroes. They were sacrifices, burning themselves up to keep others warm, becoming hateful so others could remain pure. And when the war ended, there would be no parades, no honors, no welcome home, just exile, memory, and the knowledge that they'd done something terrible for something good. 3 years and 7 months after first contact, the Galactic Union launched Operation Final Dawn. Every available warship, every soldier, every resource focused on one objective: the complete extinction of the Ravager species. Commander Lee Do-yoon orchestrated the campaign from the command carrier Righteous Fury. Around him worked 30,000 human combat personnel and 500,000 Union soldiers who'd learned humanity's hard lessons. The plan was comprehensive and brutal. Target not just Ravager military forces but their entire civilization's infrastructure, breeding worlds, food production facilities, command and control centers, everything. Some Union commanders protested. This wasn't defense anymore. This was genocide. Do-yoon's response was clinical. The Ravagers have consumed 23 civilized worlds, 40 billion dead. They don't negotiate. They don't surrender. They're a species-level threat that will rebuild and return if we leave any viable population. This isn't genocide. It's pest control on a galactic scale. The moral argument raged for 3 days until the Ravagers attacked a hospital world, killing 8 million patients and medical staff. The debate ended. Operation Final Dawn launched. The campaign lasted 9 months. It was brutal, total, and unforgiving. Human forces led every major assault, accepting casualty rates that Union commanders considered catastrophic. For every world liberated, hundreds of humans died. Kang Min-ho led the assault on Ravager Prime, the ancient homeworld where their species had evolved. Intelligence suggested the Queen Mind resided there. The ancient intelligence that coordinated all Ravager forces across the galaxy. His force consisted of 500 humans and 2,000 Union volunteers who'd fought alongside humans long enough to adopt their methods. They faced 12 million Ravagers defending their birth world with desperate ferocity. The battle lasted 6 weeks. The Union fleet maintained orbital bombardment, while ground forces pushed through hive complexes that stretched for hundreds of kilometers underground. Every meter was contested. Every chamber was a kill zone. Minho's squad reached the Queen Mind's chamber on day 42. Of his original 500, 12 remained. They were out of ammunition, exhausted, wounded. The Queen Mind was a creature the size of a building, ancient and intelligent, surrounded by elite warrior drones. Minho armed the last nuclear device they'd carried down. A tactical warhead designed to seal hive complexes. At this depth, the explosion would collapse the entire underground network. Fall back, he ordered his squad. I'll finish this, Park Ji-young refused. We came here together. We end it together. All 12 stayed. Minho's final transmission reached the fleet above. Target achieved. Detonating in 60 seconds. Tell Earth we paid our debt. Tell them the monsters did their job. The explosion registered on seismographs 3 continents away. The Queen Mind, the ancient consciousness that had coordinated Ravager expansion for 10,000 years, died along with 12 humans who'd been condemned to death on their homeworld. The remaining Ravager forces lost coordination immediately. Without the Queen Mind's intelligence, they reverted to animal behavior, fleeing, hiding, attacking randomly without strategy. Over the following 3 months, Union and human forces systematically cleared the remaining Ravager presence from inhabited space. The last confirmed Ravager died on a frozen moon in the Kelvin system, killed by a team of Union soldiers who'd learned human tactics well enough to track and eliminate the creature without casualties. The Ravager swarm was extinct. The Yao. Victory celebrations across Union worlds were subdued. Yes, they'd survived, but the cost was measured in more than lives. The civilized species of the galaxy had learned to be cruel, efficient, and ruthless. They'd learned that survival sometimes required terrible choices. Of the 30,000 humans deployed, 3,800 survived. They returned to Union space as conquerors and pariahs. The species they'd saved treated them with respect and revulsion in equal measure. Earth's government offered them a choice: return home, to serve their remaining sentences, or accept exile with full pardons. Live out their lives in the distant colonies they'd helped save, never to return to their homeworld. 3,600 chose exile. Only 200 returned to Earth, preferring imprisonment to a galaxy that would always see them as necessary monsters. Captain Kim Tae-young settled on a frontier colony in the Varan system, the same species whose people she'd sacrificed to save the rest. She opened a small shop, lived quietly, and tried not to think about the 200 million dead who'd bought time for others to live. The Varan colonists knew who she was. Some spat when she walked by. Others nodded respectfully. Most simply avoided her, uncomfortable with the moral complexity she represented. One day, a young Varan approached her shop. My family was on the southern continent, she said. They died in your diversion. Tae-young stopped what she was doing, met the girl's eyes. I know, I'm sorry. Are you? Because you did it knowing they'd die? Yes. Then how can you be sorry? Tae-young had no answer that would satisfy. Because being willing to do something terrible doesn't mean I don't understand it was terrible. I'd do it again if I had to, but I'm still sorry I had to. The girl stared at her for a long moment, then walked away without another word. Tae-young went back to work, carrying guilt she'd never shed. On Earth, General Park Hyun gave his final interview before the memorial dedication. The broadcast became the most watched program in Union history. You asked us for soldiers. We gave you weapons. Living weapons who understood that victory sometimes requires becoming what you're fighting. They were our criminals, our worst people, our condemned. We sent them because they had nothing to lose and because we knew they could win your war in ways you couldn't. You're horrified by what they did. That's good. That means you haven't become them. Hold on to that horror. Remember it. Because they did terrible things so you wouldn't have to. They became monsters so you could stay civilized. The real question isn't whether you could have won without them. It's whether you would have survived with your values intact if you'd tried. They paid the price of victory so you could afford to keep your principles, remember them. Not as heroes, as necessary evils. And remember that we humans are a species that terrifies itself. We spent 10,000 years learning to kill each other efficiently. What we did to your enemies was easy by comparison. The memorial on Earth listed 30,000 names. It stood in an isolated location, visited rarely. Humanity was uncomfortable with what the war had revealed about itself. They'd sent their worst people to fight and learned that being good at war meant being fundamentally broken in other ways. Among Union species, The Terran contingent was remembered in conflicting ways. Saviors who arrived when hope was lost, proof that civilization was a thin veneer over something darker, heroes who fought without fear, monsters who fought without mercy. A new phrase entered Union languages, Terran necessary. It meant an action so brutal it could only be justified by survival itself. It was never used lightly. In the decades that followed, the galaxy rebuilt. The Union implemented new military doctrines that balanced their values with reality. They never forgot that 3,000 years of peace had made them vulnerable to threats they'd been too civilized to imagine. And in the dark spaces between stars, other species watched and learned. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy not with philosophy or art, but with a simple, terrifying message. We are the species that terrifies itself. We survived by learning to kill each other efficiently. Imagine what we'll do to you. The human exiles lived out their lives in distant colonies, remembered and avoided, respected and feared. They'd saved the galaxy and lost their souls doing it. They'd proven that sometimes the monsters under the bed are exactly what you need to fight the monsters at the door. And they'd taught the galaxy a lesson that would echo for millennia. Peace is a luxury. Civilization is fragile, and survival sometimes requires becoming what you fear most. The war was over. The Ravagers were extinct. The galaxy was saved, and everyone had to live with the cost.